measurement for how we count impressions. Ad serving has been around for 20 years. Every ad server still counts an impression differently. How are we going to close that gap? And I think bodies like this helps drive that, And I think, in digital, it becomes super complicated, right? I mean, everyone who's sitting here understands that. We have to introduce an ad server so that the ad server counts impressions. Oh, the ad server is not sophisticated enough now to count viewability. So let's introduce somebody else to count viewability. Or what about fraud? Let's introduce somebody else to count fraud. Well, how many pixels are you going to put in your campaign? And who is the body that is taking on all this work? It's the agency. Right? So the complexity just kind of piles on. And how do we then think about trading? Because now our focus has shifted, right? It's as much about how do we extract value from the media as it is about executing correctly so that you can realize that value. And so the paradigm has shifted, right? The balance of power. Before, if you're an advertiser and you spend X million of dollars, you get to go to the Super Bowl party, you get to get, first page cover, whatever, right? You get that kind of influence. And there was no first-party data to speak of because all the advertisers had possibly were zip codes, and they could say, oh, I want to buy this zip code, or I can buy Spot TV. And now it's programmatic everything, Programmatic digital has matured. You've heard of programmatic digital out of home. That's coming. It's already available in certain markets. Programmatic radio is coming. I saw a chart at Google a couple months ago, and they said programmatic print is coming. And the video that we saw earlier about people choosing their content and all that, I mean, it seems futuristic, but these technology companies are already thinking about it. So how do we marry all that when all consumers want, and they're so used to it right now, is I want to see this now. I want to skip ads. Or if your ad is compelling enough for me to see, or if my friends are talking about the ad, then I'll actually go just look at the ad. I won't even look at the content. So I think it's important that when we think about ad trading, we're thinking about all these components because we have to evolve how we think about ad trading. And from an agency perspective, what is really what are the issues? You've heard a lot about this thing called transparency. Advertisers want transparency. Everybody wants transparency. Are you arbitraging my media? The truth of the matter is, before programmatic, advertisers didn't really have a choice when they bought long-tail sites. They have to go to an ad network and hand over an IO, and they basically paid whatever the ad networks say, right? The ad networks were making a killing. 80% margin, 120% margin. I've heard stories of Yahoo is closing their month and they're waiting for a $2 million IO from an ad network because that's going to make their numbers, and the ad networks will get 20 cents CPM, and they will turn around and sell to the advertisers for $5. But advertisers did not have a choice because there was no transparency there. And now, and they seem to be completely fine with the ad networks making that money. But I believe that you do have to have transparency, and that is the promise of programmatic, because it allows you to look at your media, and it allows you to look at your data, and how much should you spend on each to make sure that it works for you, right? So if you look at the remuneration challenges that we have in the agency side is media arbitrage. If you look at our two closest competitors, OMG and WPP, they've had huge earnings, and they're completely transparent about how they're making that. It is through media arbitrage. But again, we're here to make money, right? As long as the client is aware that there's arbitrage happening, theoretically it should be fine, right? And there's fee-based and commission, which is the model that we ascribe to, which is a fee-based. So we tell the clients exactly what they're paying for their media, and we charge them a percent. So that's how we do that. But even these models are becoming a problem for advertisers, because then they require even more transparency. And I think the problem that I have with that, and I think a lot of my peers in the industry have with that, is that it's selective. This transparency is selective. Because when they buy from GDN, Google Display Network, it's an ad network. There is no transparency. But they don't go to Google and say, well, how much are you paying for tech, and what is your margin? They don't do that. They're quite happy to pay whatever Google says. And talk about fraud. Google doesn't scrub anything. How do you think they're giving these advertisers these huge clicks? It doesn't exist. I have advertisers who come to me and go, I get 2% click-through rate from GDN. Good for you. But I can't deliver that because we know that 2% click-through rate does not exist in our industry, not anymore. So it is the selective transparency and fraud that I have issues with, and I think around this table is where we can solve it, and where you guys can come in and ask the right questions and educate the advertisers, because so often they look at a Google, they look at a Facebook, and they go, must be great. But these are not media companies. These are technology companies. And I think because they represent so much media, that people think that they are media companies. But if you think about it, what content do they develop? They don't. They aggregate content. They take content that you create on Facebook and make it and provide a platform to get that content out. Google aggregates all the news information and what have you and pushes that out. They do not create their own content yet. Maybe sometime down the road, but right now it's super profitable for them to not create content. Content is expensive. That's what the publishers do. The people that you audit, that's what they're in the business of doing. They create content. And so when advertisers are so heavily leaning towards a Facebook and a Google, and they're just throwing money across the fence, and also putting their tags on the pages, whose data does that belong to? What are you allowing Facebook and Google to see? Does that contribute to your rising media costs? I don't know. But are advertisers testing enough to really understand what it means when you put a tag on your page? Who has access to it? So all this is part of trading, because trading is no longer about media. Trading is also about your data. When you put an ad network tag on your page, make no mistake about it, they're taking that data and using it for another campaign that could be a competitor. That happens all the time. And what are we mired with? We're mired with co-opetition. We try to cooperate, but really it's also a competition. And we have to do that because of control. Clients are trying to pit us against each other to find out what the truth is. And that doesn't really help anybody, not even the clients. And so how do we evolve ad trading? The top of my list, sharing is caring. When I was in the US and I sat on the IAB boards, we always talked about that, sharing is caring. Because it's not about the agencies against the publishers. It's about how do we share information in such a way that we create value. If a campaign is working well, we should not be hiding that it's working well for the fear that the media cost is going to go up. We should tell the publishers what's working so that we can get more of what's working. Because advertisers are quite happy to pay if they can find a consumer that is loyal, that is spending a ton of money on their product. That gets rid of waste, that gets rid of fraud. So sharing is caring. So when you deal with the publishers, you deal with anybody, you try to share as much information as you can that is actionable. Because I think a lot of times that's what's missing. We have data, lots and lots and lots of data. But what can we do with it? If we can't action on it, that data is basically useless in my view. Value extraction for all parties. Everyone has a stake at the game. So that means that we all need to extract value. If any party is not getting value out of this, we lose any kind of incentive to make this work. So the publishers need to make the money, the advertisers need to get their audience and have it be effective, and agencies just want to be the smooth third party. Test and learn. I think that's something that clients say they want to do, but very often when they embark on that path and something's not working, they're like, just pull it. I get cold feet, just pull it. But it's not about making a big test. It's about having a roadmap. What are we going to do in Q1? How does the Q1 results drive our Q2 test and learn in Q3? And do we go back and test some other things because the market has changed? Because in digital, everything is evolutionary. Nothing is static. You can test for standards today, but the technology is going to evolve, and that means you have to redo it and make sure that, before we couldn't test on viewability, but now we know that there are ways to do it. Before we couldn't do a lot of things, but that doesn't impede us from doing that because we're human and we evolve and we create new technology that can enable us to do things. And the fourth point is governance and discipline. I did not experience this as much when I was in the US, but definitely here in Asia, which is if we want to put a tag on a client's page to do any kind of conversion, optimization, or whatever, you would never get it done. I have clients that are 18 months on in conversation, talking to them about, can we put a tag on your site so that we can, so that we're not just measuring click-through rates anymore? Because that's so 1999. No, you can't put a tag on our page. Or you get a conversation going and all of a sudden it's like, the person leaves and you gotta start over. There should be governance and discipline. There should be a body of people that says, these kinds of tags can go on, these kinds of tags cannot go on. What are you doing? We sign an NDA before we let you put a tag on our page. That's governance. And that's something that should happen because ad trading is now also data. And transparency, right? Transparency conversations these days are often one way. It's advertiser wants to know, what is your margin? I want to know how much you're paying for tech. I want to know how much you're paying for media. But it needs to be all around. All parties should be transparent. So advertiser, are you prepared to tell me what you're paying a competing agency? Because now I'm no longer AOR. Would you do that? Publisher, are you giving somebody else a better rate than I am? Are you going to tell me what you're giving me? So we turn the transparency conversation, right? It's no longer agency, how much money you're making, what are you doing? You've all read the headlines. The agency business is under attack. They're not making that much money. That's a fact, right? And then finally, I think, what's really important is finding and creating relevance. What do I mean by consumption consolidation? I did a sort of informal poll, but I'm sure it's pretty representative. Go up to a couple people and I go like, okay, if you want to watch a digital video, where do you go? YouTube. Everyone, YouTube. That is consumption consolidation. Do they create any of that content again? No. How are you reading on news media? Twitter? Facebook? Newsfeed? Why do we call it newsfeed? So how do we make the publishers, your clients, find relevance and create relevance in this era? Because all their content, nobody goes to your site anymore. They go to YouTube. They go to Facebook. Somebody shares a link. So that balance of power has shifted. The content creators are no longer king. And so I leave this to you for something to kind of mull over. It is not murky at all. It is quite clear. I think we need to reinvigorate our industry. How do we change that 1%? I want to see that 1% become 2 and 3 and 5, right? And that's not by doing the same thing. We cannot indulge in share shift. We need to grow share. Consumers are blocking the ads, which means they're not finding our formats compelling. They want something else. And what can we give them? So with that, questions?
Does anybody have any questions for Grace as a start?
You can grab me. We're having tea after this, I guess. So.
And we're going to do a panel session for those of the speakers that can stay as well, give you time to think about it. But please do think about it, because it's not that often you get people of this level with this experience that you can challenge and ask questions of. So please make the most of it, make it worthwhile.
Okay, everybody, thank you very much for a good start to the morning. We're going to take a morning tea break for 15 to 20 minutes, so please feel free to refresh your batteries, and we're going to gear up for after morning tea with Joe from Comscore and the panel with Richard, so we've got another opportunity to talk to everybody. And Richard from Surface Stream.
So back here at 4:15.
Yeah.